Hello friends, I'm Christos Ntatsios from the Press Project for the Voice of Europe and the Real News Network. The annual report of Amnesty International has just been published. You can actually read it in amnestyusa.org. For this, I am joined by Mr. Giogos Kosmopoulos, Director of the Greek Division of Amnesty International, in order to talk about some important points raised in it. Since we are the Voice of Europe, we would focus on the most recent European issues that are being discussed in the report. Giorgo, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I propose that before we start, we could watch a short video that you made to accompany the publication of your annual report for 2015.
Let's do that.
Thank you.
Our basic human rights as human beings are being held in contempt or ignored by those with power over us. Some governments are breaking international laws that were designed to protect us. Others are breaching their own legal statutes, claiming it's for our own safety or simply to stay in control.
Human rights is not a nice to add accessory. It's a necessity, it's a precondition for modern society. What we are seeing in the world is a truly alarming situation. The system that the international community had put together over 70 years to protect the human rights, the basic rights of some of the most vulnerable people in the world is at risk.
If you're a refugee, you have a legal right to be offered safety. Yet tens of thousands are being pushed back at borders.
طلبنا منهم يفوتونا على هنغاريا يعني سكروا الباب بوجهنا يعني جايين على اساس مشان حقوق الانسان وين حقوق الانسان
30 or more countries illegally forced refugees to return to places where they would be in danger. And this is what they're fleeing from. If you're Saudi Arabian, you cannot enjoy freedom of speech. You can be flogged simply for writing a blog critical of the government. If you're Russian and are in any way seen as opposing the government, you face harassment, jail, or could be assassinated. If you're American or British, you will be subject to mass surveillance by the state and can have your calls eavesdropped on or your emails read. If you are Thai, you can be arrested for staging plays or posting comments on Facebook that the military authorities don't like. If Nigerian, you can be arrested and detained without trial, merely on the word of a pointer claiming you to be a sympathiser of Boko Haram. If Mexican, you can simply disappear and be killed for opposing the government, like the 43 students from Ayotzinapa. Governments have also attacked or neglected those institutions which are there to protect people's rights.
Take the Security Council. The Security Council is totally focused on playing politics rather than protecting the lives of the most vulnerable people.
Saudi Arabia and its coalition partners, including the USA and the UK, blocked the UN from carrying out an investigation into war crimes committed by Saudi-led forces in Yemen. This was despite compelling evidence of civilians being targeted, including the bombing of schools.
الإنسانية انتهت يعني مكان تعليمي يضرب بهذه الصورة لا ذنب له سوى الإشاعات.
The International Criminal Court is now in session.
The International Criminal Court is being undermined by governments trying to escape international justice.
The African Union institutions, which the African countries helped us to create the International Criminal Court, now they're threatening to withdraw from it. So all the major protection systems and institutions are under serious threat right now.
And in 2015, those trying to protect our rights and stand up to governments were harassed, detained, or even killed. 156 human rights defenders are known to have died.
Governments should stop attacking human rights. defenders of human rights, institutions, laws, policies, and governments can make this happen. It's not for governments to tell somebody else. They can stop this. They have to stop it today.
So, if I could impose for you, instead of a question about the report, if you could just give us a brief description of what is happening with the migrant issue in Europe this time.
Well, what we're seeing is a big rise in the numbers of people who are trying to enter in the Europe through Greece, mostly try to seek asylum, to seek refugee in the European Union. The vast majority of these people are what we call refugees. They come from countries like Syria or Afghanistan, where wars and other grave human rights violations actually give them no option but to run for their lives, run to save their children and their families. They're just trying to escape from terrible situation, seeking nothing more than to protect their lives.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Only through the Greek border, I mean, more than 800,000 enter through Greece, more than 1 million entered the European Union as a whole in 2015.
Only in 2015?
Yes, I'm talking about the figures of only 2015.
So this is a major influx of new people entering Europe, and in fact, people who are mostly Muslim. In Europe, what we hear is that the Europeans are trying to find a way to deal with this. What has Amnesty International found about the way that Europe is dealing with this problem? We
found that they have not been dealing with it very well. First, to start by saying, indeed, the number, the increase, is very sharp, but we cannot say that it's like numbers that it's uncontrollable, it's unmanageable. The European Union is among the biggest political and financial blocs in the world. It has a population of more than 500 million people. Therefore, the influx of 1 million people should and must become manageable. Where the European Union has failed blatantly is to find a coordinated way to do that and find a humane way to do that. What we've seen is more and more a shift towards militarizing and trying to impose more and more barriers in order to stop people from coming, stop people from seek refuge in Europe.
Is this the main, this report, this 2015 report, has it found that conditions about human rights and human rights violations in Europe have worsened or compared to previous years?
Well, if you take a look at the reception conditions here in Greece, for example, that we have recorded, the conditions were dire. People were living, they had to spend days or weeks in mud and very difficult situation. That includes families, for example. So yeah, that was a really, really bad situation to see in Europe in 2015. But overall, we have found out that the whole protection system in Europe, and that includes the refugees and migrants, is at risk. We're talking about almost 70 years of progress now being under direct threat.
So would you say that the main reason for this worsening of the situation in human rights in Europe is the refugee crisis, the migrant crisis, or are there other things that are going worse than they were?
No, the refugees are never a problem. Refugees have problems. Therefore, you cannot say that the problem is the refugees. The response is the problems. What we have seen is a lack of political will to deal with this matter in a way that's compliant with international law, compliant with European Union law, and the basic principles of humanity who form the body of human rights. So what we've seen is the lack of political will to put into practice, to put into place the administrative side of it. So no, by no means is the refugees issues. Then we have also seen in Europe a response to the attacks in Paris, for example, that were disproportionate. They go beyond what is necessary for a state to protect its safety, and we are fearing that this has implications in very basic rights and fundamental freedoms of people, like the right to privacy, right to presumption of innocence. And that goes also to say about the massive surveillance program put together by the USA, but also by their European counterparts, for example, in the United Kingdom, where we have noticed and have recorded massive surveillance in breach of international law, domestic law, and the basic and fundamental rights of someone into privacy.
In the beginning of the migrant crisis, we saw that most Central European countries, the rhetoric of the countries was a rhetoric of acceptance for the migrants. But what we're seeing as this crisis progresses and becomes bigger and bigger, we see that there are countries which are shutting down their borders. We see institutions which are changing their attitude towards the problem, and also, as you said, we see no realistic mechanisms to deal with this problem. What do you think? Why is this particularly important? What is happening? How is this going to change the way Europe operates as a democratic, free union of countries?
Well, in the beginning of 2015, there were different reactions. Some states were more open to receive refugees and migrants, others were less. But towards the end of the year, we've seen that more and more the European countries were becoming more and more closed. The impact of these policies of people of limiting access to fundamental rights, which is the right to asylum, the right for someone not to be executed, not to be left to die where he or she is, not to be tortured, is in great peril. Therefore, if the European Union loses these basic fundamental principles, I mean, it's very difficult to continue speaking about a union or a bloc of countries, political, whatever you name, which is based on human rights, which is based on the fundamental principles of humanity that it professes to be the core of its funding principles.
Our main audience are American people, and it is a country of migrants in essence, but this happened many hundreds of years ago. What has happened recently was the 9/11 bombings, which brought the feeling of terrorism in that country and has actually changed the way the whole world is and operates concerning rights, concerning the right of police to intervene in the lives of actual citizens. The main argument for that was that if somebody had nothing to hide, they had nothing to fear. How has this changed, and how is this also now happening in Europe?
Well, one direct outcome of the recent attacks in Paris, but also attacks that happened before, is this attack on this same notion, that the presumption of innocence, and that is very, very frightening. It's very worrying, especially what we see now happening in France. Therefore, this debate probably changed according to the political climate and atmosphere in different countries, but I assume it's not very far. It's very frightening, and I'm afraid to say that the mistakes that were done in the approach the US took back then, it might be repeated in Europe, and that is not going to bring security, but it's definitely going to bring a deterioration of basic fundamental human rights values if it carries on like that.
In the southern, mostly in the southern Europe, before the migrant crisis, we also had a big economic crisis, and in particular, Greece has been the center of the economic crisis. We have suffered the most from it, and we still do. Now, what is now happening in Greece is that this influx of refugees, which mainly comes to Europe through Greece, worsens the situation, and it also worsens our ability to negotiate with our European partners, because there is a sort of equilibrium between what we have to do concerning our debt and what we can ask from Europe in terms of help. Is this making Greece more weak in its attempt to offer human rights and protection to all these people who are coming?
I mean, nobody can argue against the basic fact that Greece is in the middle of a twin crisis. One is the financial crisis, and the second is the refugee crisis. And it's for sure that the ability of Greece to cope with the refugee crisis, it has been limited and has been severely impacted by the financial crisis, and therefore that's what we always argue, is that member states like Greece, which, if you want to call it the first line reception, should be reinforced, should be supported by the European counterparts. That's why we always call for a coordinated approach, and that doesn't mean only financial support, which is essential obviously, but also technical support, political support to deal with this issue jointly. No country alone can deal with this influx on its own. Even Germany, the biggest European country or the most politically and economically strong, cannot do it. But together, joined as European Union, we can deal with that. We can do something that we can be very proud of in the future to come, that in the time of need, we look back at the fundamental values of our society and we offer a helping hand to those people in need, in some of the worst times in their lives, probably.
So, do you actually think that part of the problem is in reality the bad economy, or does it work as an excuse for the powers that be not to do their part?
You mean as far as human rights are concerned?
Yes, yeah.
Well, as I tell you, there is a part where yes, indeed, the financial crisis has limited the capacity. For example, the asylum system, the reception system in Greece was already flattering. It was really malfunctional. But under the pressure, of course, it collapsed. It's now beyond a breaking point, and that could not have been fixed by Greece alone, let alone by a country that is experiencing the financial troubles that it does. But on the other hand, on the political side, it's completely unfair to use that word, to expect from that country, be it Greece or it might be a next country in the future, to deal that alone. So my main point is that the inability of the European Union to respond in a coordinated way has actually made things worse, and made things worse in Greece in 2015. And unless this approach changes, things won't change in Greece too.
My next question concerns another subject, but we will stay in Greece. Greece, as we said, has suffered all this huge economic crisis, and the debt has soared, and in effect, the whole country, the whole economy is under a memorandum with the European creditors, which enforces the country to follow specific policies of austerity. Has this affected the rights and the quality of life in terms of human rights of the people?
In Greece, you mean?
Of the Greek people, yes.
Well, I mean, one has to understand that every policy decision made should have one of its main guiding principles should be human rights. No policy like that should violate human rights. And even in the most difficult financial situation, which obviously has an impact, there should be a minimum standard of rights that should be respected. There should always be a net to catch or to help the most weak, the people who need it most. And if these policy changes actually go beyond that line, it's a serious human rights violation. The violation is not only somebody being deprived of their liberty, but it's also somebody being excluded for financial reasons or other reasons from education. Somebody who cannot have access to water, or somebody who cannot live in adequate housing. Therefore, all these policy decisions should be guided by not only not to violate human rights, but also to have a direct approach to reinforce human rights for everyone in the society. And that is a main concern to be seen, not only now, but also in the future, how Europe is going to react with the financial crisis that is still going on. Whenever
someone watches a discussion with concerning issues like that, I always wanted to have the ability to ask this last question that I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to leave it open to you to answer it. Do you have any good news for us about 2015?
Yeah, there was some good news. I mean, a few people we campaigned for years to be released, they were released. There was some progress in issues like, in Greece, for example, there was the adoption of a civil partnership extended to the gay, homosexual people, to the LGBTI community. And I think there are small gains to be seen here and there in the world. But I don't want to sound alarmist by saying that the trend overall is negative. And I'm not saying that because I think people need the right information and right level information in order to make informed decisions on how to fight for the rights and how to reverse this trend, because I think it's urgent to reverse the trend. So
the ball is essentially, as it always was, in the people's court. It's the people that have to act.
Exactly. Amnesty International is a movement of more than 7 million people across the world, and what we do is we document and we enable the people, the rights holders themselves, to act in order to bring about the changes they want to see, a more fair world, a more fair system where everybody enjoys their rights equally.
Giorgo, I thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for your time.
And I thank you for watching us. It was Christos Ntatsios from the Press Project, the Voice of Europe and the Real News Network. Thank you.